Happy Friday, Miami. This is Peter Zalewski. I'm a condo consultant, also founder of the Miami Condo Investing Club. You are tuning in for Buy, Sell, Hold Miami, a real estate podcast where we talk straight about what's going on in the real estate market in South Florida. I'm joined here with my co-host, Daniel Hernandez from Compass Real Estate. His office is over in Coconut Grove. He does single-family houses as well as condos. We're going to spend the next hour or so discussing some of the stories we think are interesting from a local's perspective. So with that being said, here's a baton, Daniel. Take over.
What's up, Peter? Happy Friday.
Finally made it. We're coming up to the end of Q3. I'm very excited about that.
I know, but I think we're going to talk about that a little bit next week. But what's up, everybody? Welcome. End of September, end of Q3, as Peter will remind you several more times throughout this show. But this is Buy, Sell, Hold Miami. So if you're just joining us for the first time, this is episode 19. It is September the 26th. 2025. We've almost been doing this for half a year, Peter, every week, every Friday live. So if you're just joining us for the first time today, my name is Daniel Hernandez, as Peter pointed out. And what we do is we pick 5 topics every week. And you can see that down at the bottom left of your screen. We call that the rundown. And so we got 60 minutes with you, and we got about 7 minutes with each topic. If we go a little bit over, that's okay. We have overtime for that. And then at the end of each topic, Peter and I are either going to buy, we're going to sell, or we're going to hold because maybe there's not enough information. And sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree, and that's what makes the show interesting. So with that, we only got you for 60 minutes. So let's butt heads, Peter. About a year ago, in what I'll call an effort to stay relevant, our governor, Ron DeSantis, proposed something kind of incredible. Down here in Florida, we don't pay income tax. So our government coffers, municipal, county, state, schools, they're filled by property tax. It's about 2% here in Miami-Dade County. And Governor Ron DeSantis proposed sort of the unthinkable. Hey guys, why don't we eliminate property tax? I'd love to pay less tax, but it gets kind of weird there because what is going to be the revenue for these municipalities? I mean, we know here in Miami-Dade, we had a $402 million budget shortfall just this past summer. And so if we cut property taxes, which, by the way, I looked it up, $55 billion a year comes from property taxes. $19 billion of that comes from homesteaded properties. So I think the governor's proposal is to cut back the taxes from homesteaded properties, that meaning $19 billion. So that would leave a $19 billion budget gap in all these municipalities. And if we know anything about municipal administration down here in South Florida, is that we don't want to put too much on their plate. So presenting them with billions of dollars to fill seems kind of a difficult thing to do, especially for somebody, a city administrator who makes probably low 6 figures and has to live in workforce housing. But that's something else we're going to talk about today. Peter, what have you read into this property tax boondoggle that we're presented with in Tallahassee?
Okay, just so everybody's on the same page, I just want to point out that, that 2% property tax, a third's going to the school board, a third's going to the county, and a third's going to the city. So everybody basically is involved with trying to keep the hustle going. They need to have higher prices. Why? Because then they get more money in their coffers. I like to say during the Great Recession, City of Miami had a junk bond rating. The credit rating for the City of Miami was junk bond status. It was horrible. It was like a subprime borrower. And why did they have that? Because real estate prices started to free fall when we went through the Great Recession. We had too many condos that were built. So other places like Fort Lauderdale and Boca Raton, they realized too that, they were anti-development. But then when the Great Recession hit, they weren't diversified enough. So they then started building all the new towers you're seeing in Fort Lauderdale as well as Boca Raton. So that's kind of a fundamental aspect. The other part you need to keep in mind is if you want to deal with property taxes, you want to bring them in the line, my opinion, what you do is you eliminate the homestead. You eliminate the homestead. Now,
that's not going to be very popular.
Well, and anybody who doesn't know, in Florida, if you are a primary resident, you get to claim something that's called a homestead exemption. If you claim a homestead exemption, you're going to get locked in at a certain price. So all of your property taxes going forward will be locked in, and they'll only increase based on inflation, which we all know has not been good. Remember, it was up to 9.1%. Now we're sitting at 2.9%. So, and there's a cap on it. I think it's CPI or 3% annually.
It's 3% annually if it's homesteaded, and if it's not homesteaded, it's 10%.
then it can effectively float. So what I'm telling you is there's a bunch of people who have had places forever and ever and ever. They can't afford to sell because they go to a new place and they get priced out. Their tax going forward is going to be based on 2%. Right. It's going to be much higher. So you have a lot of people with too much space. They simply have had the buildings, the houses 20, 30, 40 years. They can't afford to leave. So they have excess. And why do they have excess? Because there was something called portability, again, not to get all bogged down in it. But what I say is lift the homestead. If you lift the homestead, now suddenly everybody's going to get assessed at the appropriate price. And those people who are in these mansions that they've had for 30, 40 years that are now worth $2 million, but they paid $150,000 on, and they're paying a tax based on $150,000. I think that would go a long way towards selling it all off. But ultimately, what I would argue this entire thing's about is, remember, how they're going to fund it if they get rid of the property taxes. They're going to put in place some sort of tourist tax. They're also going to, here, I'm looking at a story from Florida Politics. They say that 3 ways they're going to pay for it is there'll be real estate transaction costs. So they're going to jack up the fees to do a real estate deal. They're also going to hit everybody with a new sales tax. And then there's going to be surcharges for tourists. Think H-1B visa. President Trump announced that if you are H-1B a visa holder, it's going to be $100,000 a person to come annually. Why doesn't Governor DeSantis simply charge everybody, I don't know, $1,000 if you want to visit Florida? Why not stick with that rationale? They're not going to do it. But then the final point I would tell you is really this is a power grab, my opinion. What they're trying to do is the state's trying to concentrate power into the state. Therefore, everything becomes statewide. And
take it away from the county. Right.
Yeah. You get money, you don't get money. Well, right now, all of these entities are operating on their own simply from the fact that they're all playing off of the property tax. And those counties like South Florida, who are probably donating more than they're getting back, hence the bridge that we're doing right there in Greater Downtown Miami by the Performing Arts Center, the Spider Bridge or whatever they're calling it. This one with all these
signature bridge.
Yeah, signature bridge. That's an example of how money had to be given back because we were simply sending too much up to Tallahassee. We weren't getting it back in place. So really, I think this is a power move to shift all of the power to Tallahassee, take it away from the local politicians, and then the governor, whoever that is, can decide you've been good, you get money. You haven't been good, you're not going to get money. Much like what we're seeing in Washington D.C. right now. That's my take on it.
That's really interesting, and I'm not a fan. Opinion drives this show at Buy Sell Hold Miami. And for the history of forever, as long as I can look back at it, in South Florida, all commerce, our economy is driven by development. And we've talked about it on the show. There's sort of this vicious cycle, this vicious circle that we have. Developers buy something, they tear it down, they make something shinier and newer. It's worth more money. More property taxes, the city gets to collect those property taxes. So if we eliminate property taxes, who's kissing the politicians' asses now? Part of my French. What, Simon Mall is going to be the new lobbyist in City Hall? Because if Related Group isn't kissing City Hall butt, then who is? Because somebody is gaining revenue from whatever property tax scheme is happening. If it's sales tax and we double the sales tax, it talked about doubling the sales tax because I guess that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the simplest thing to do. Right now in the state of Florida, we have 6% sales tax. We double it to 12%. That'll fill at least part of the gap. They talked about a 5% transaction fee. Did you see that article? Just a straight up 5% transaction fee. And once you pay that transaction fee, when you're purchasing your property, then you don't have to pay any more property tax. That was something else proposed. There's going to be a ton of things proposed between now and next November when they are at least trying to put it on the ballot. I believe they don't need to amend the Constitution of the state of Florida. We just need 60% of the voters to vote for this thing, whatever the proposal would be, and then they could execute it. At least that's my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, but that's just what I've read from Tallahassee Democrat.
I mean, I think the problem is what Tallahassee, which is where the capital of Florida is, it's located way the hell north. I mean, you want to drive to Tallahassee from Miami? What is it, Daniel? 5-hour ride? It's like going to FSU.
No, it's 5 hours just to get to the Panhandle. Probably 7,
okay, 8. Yeah, I mean, they're practically in a different time zone from all of South Florida.
Very close to it, sure.
Yeah, and I think what's happening is the real power structure of this area is occurring down here in the Tri-County South Florida area. And Tallahassee, South Florida doesn't necessarily always agree. I mean, there's a DOGE effort, Department of Government Efficiency, that's currently underway. Where were the two places they went to take a look at in terms of the governor? Where did he sig them? He sigged them on Broward County, which is hardcore Democrat, tends to be a vote Democrat, and he sigged them on Gainesville, where the University of Florida is located. We're kind of moving to a phase, it seems like, where Washington and the politics up in Washington are starting to control kind of what's going on in the state of Florida. Like, remember, the state of Florida was very, very fast moving in terms of the immigration policy that President Trump announced. That's why we set up Alcatraz.
Right.
And I don't know what the latest is. Supposedly they're shutting it down. A judge ruled. I don't know what the appeals are.
The Herald hasn't written a thing about it in weeks. I don't know what's going on. Maybe there's no news. There's no news. Good news. I'm not sure. What I do know is that there are about 67 counties in the state of Florida. 51 of them count on property tax revenue as their single largest revenue driver.
Yeah, I'm sure that's most counties. I mean, we got a few exceptions when things are rocking and rolling, but at the end of the day, this is the point I want everybody to recognize. Okay, if you come to Florida, I want you to know, if you spend money here, most likely you are paying for our infrastructure. We build stuff by bonding it out, and then the bonds are paid for by tourist tax. A rent-a-car, a hotel, getting on a cruise, going through Miami International Airport. Why? Because you are effectively subsidizing us to live here. And how does the subsidy occur? It occurs primarily through the role of a homestead exemption. So out-of-towners are paying for us. Why don't we just go and hit everybody? Hit them. Do you want to come to Florida? It's going to be $500.
Well,
it's $100.
That's the argument that's the argument for the sales tax. What, you're not going to go to Disney anymore? You're not going to go on a cruise? You're not going to pick up the cruise ship industry and send it to Savannah, Georgia, or Charleston, South Carolina? Where, you're going to move Disney to Georgia? They're not going to do it. The sales tax increase, again, probably the most obvious thing to do, but it will also harm middle and low income residents here, people who aren't homeowners. There are plenty of people here who are not homeowners who do not have a dog in this fight. And they're going to cut the property tax. And then all these people who are renters, who are not homeowners, are just going to get smacked. So I'm a sell on it. I'm a homeowner. I like the status quo. There was some talk about making homestead, limiting homestead property tax assessed values to keep in step with inflation. Okay, I'm a fan of that. I do think that's fair, because it's been 25,000 and 25,000 for forever. So maybe if the second 25,000 goes up to, I don't know, 25,700 next year, and then 26,300 the year after that. All right, maybe that's a nice little compromise. But to eliminate the thing entirely, hard sell.
Yeah. And I said this on WLRN. I call up when they do their program, it's the NPR affiliate. I'm like, listen, you want to deal with this? Lift the homestead exemption. Let the market play out. Don't take a socialistic approach where you're giving certain people an exemption. Why? Because they showed up first. It's kind of like a not in my backyard type of situation. Well, I got mine, so nobody else gets it. So you want to let the market float, let it float. But I also don't want all the power being shifted up in Tallahassee, because the way they think in Tallahassee versus the way
very different.
Probably it's dramatically different. So I am a sell, pound on the table, sell. No. Okay. Unless they say we will do that, and now your insurance is included in your ownership costs, because
how could they possibly do that? You can't control the private market. Oh wait, you can do that now.
We got Citizens. Let Citizens do it.
They've been kicking people off of Citizens in droves at every opportunity they can get. I thought this was a free state of Florida, quote unquote. That's a quote. That's not me saying it. You can't turn it into a completely socialist program. Oh no, socialism.
If you listen to radio talk call-in shows, like, again, I listen to WLRN. Why? Because it's local news, it's reporters. I got a pretty good idea of the way that they operate. The calls that always come every time we talk about property tax, what does everybody talk about? Listen, property tax is fine. Let's deal with insurance. The insurance is the one that's really kind of got people all wound up. So Governor DeSantis, all due respect, if you want to focus on something, once you focus on the insurance and getting that under control, I think would be much more beneficial and helpful, and kind of leave the property tax fight for another day.
You heard it here. Peter Zalewski, buy, sell, hold Miami. We're both selling. On to the next one. Lincoln Road, which I have not patronized since, well, I can't tell you last time I went to Lincoln Road, but it's getting a revamp. $29.4 million, which doesn't seem like a whole lot. If let's start with that. But they're revamping Lincoln Road, $29.4 million upgrade that includes these sweeping projects along Drexel and Meridian, which are the north-south avenues that span Lincoln Road. If you've never been to Lincoln Road, if you're joining us from out of state, Lincoln Road is a pedestrian mall that goes from Alton Road, which is on the west side of Miami Beach, all the way to the beach. The last two eastern blocks aren't pedestrianized, like where the Ritz-Carlton is, but because of that new ultra-luxury Ritz-Carlton project that they're putting up, there's a lobbying push to pedestrianize those final two blocks, which I'm a big fan of. I don't know what it's going to do to the traffic patterns that are already horrendous on Miami Beach, but that's for another day. So there's this whole plan to revitalize this stretch of Lincoln Road, which, as I understand it, I'm too young to really speak to this. Maybe you can speak to it. But in the 90s, Lincoln Road was a no-go zone. And then they had some tenant selection, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And then they opened up, what was that place? Yucca. And it became sort of a cool kids local hotspot. And then over the course of the last 20 years or so, it's just completely washed out. They got an Apple store that anchors it. They had the movie theater, the Regal Cinema, that just closed now. They're gone. It's going to turn into, traveling carnival museum sort of thing. They had.
Hey, remember we talked
the
about
Carney
the history of
Sweetwater
carnivals.
Yeah,
The Carnies in South Florida.
I will say that my favorite building in town, which speaks to Miami, is that the parking garage at 1111 Lincoln Road is probably the most beautiful parking garage anyone's ever seen. If we do anything right in this town, it's build nice parking garages. The design district.
And it wasn't a local.
It wasn't a local.
Remember, I did consulting on that project. It was not a local. The guy was from Europe. And
very European. And I mean, talk about a vanity investment, right? So he has his outdoor parking garage with like 25-foot ceilings. It is the most inefficient use of space ever. It's like Steve Jobs invented this thing. And then to top it off, he put a single condo on the top of this thing. Very, very cool. But in any event, so Lincoln Road sort of fell into, I don't want to say despair, but there's a ton of for-lease signs all up and down Lincoln Road. A lot of the big tenants pulled out unless you're one of these large multinationals like Apple or Starbucks. And because of the rise of neighborhoods like the Design District and Wynwood and, the shops over at Bell Harbor, if you're an out-of-town corporation looking for somewhere to plant your flag, is Lincoln Road on your list? I don't think it has been for some time.
All right. Now I'm going to give you my take on it. You ready? Are you ready?
Go.
So this is what we got. The city of Miami Beach, generally speaking, I want everybody to get a big picture idea. I want you to think of a teeter-totter. The heavy part of the teeter-totter is going to be South Beach. The light part, which is in the air, is going to be North Beach. Everybody who works at North Beach, they tend to work, that lives in North Beach, they work in South Beach. That's generally speaking kind of the way it works. Now, Lincoln Road, I got here in 1993. I lived off of Meridian and 8th Street. So I was about 8 blocks down. Lincoln Road starts about 16 and a half or so. It's about 8 blocks from east to west or from west to east, basically from Bay or intercoastal to the Atlantic. If we got roughly $30 million going into it with 8 blocks, we're talking about close to $4 million a block in terms of doing stuff in the.
It doesn't seem like a lot.
It depends. I got a feeling somebody's brother-in-law, sister-in-law, good friend, significant other probably got the contract or is going to get some of these contracts. So, but that's my take on it. Just like Flagler Street in Greater Downtown Miami, which again is going to take another couple of years to go.
Isn't the Ritz, the developers who are redoing the Ritz throwing something like $12 million just on that alleyway?
Well, there we go. And that is a good thing. But let me take you back to 1993. 1993, effectively, when I got here, I lived across from a house. At the time, you call it a crack den. People don't do crack, I don't think, anymore. Now it's meth or
we still call
whatever the hell they're doing.
Though.
All right, so you still call it a crack den. So back at the time, the big issue was there wasn't even permit parking. And when you wanted to do something, you basically had Alton Road. You had Washington Avenue, which is going east. That was like the bars. Then you had Ocean Drive, where it was cool. It was kind of up and coming. It wasn't necessarily there. And then you had Lincoln Road, but Lincoln Road was filled with a bunch of places that were individually owned. Think tchotchkes. Think of like your grandparents having a tourist shop selling T-shirts and like mugs and stuff. That's primarily what it was. There was really nothing to see there. There was a Books and Books open up there. That was like a whole big deal. Then they had a little cinema in the back, or a little like a place you could watch, like I think they were like on a projector. You could watch movies and stuff like that. And then Mara Rebel, relative of Steve Rebel, the guy from Studio 54. She comes down here and she buys a building right there on, I think it was, what would that be? Maybe Meridian and Lincoln Road. She buys this building, she restores it. She's got all kind of juice from New York City. And once she does that, she's able to convince Sony. At the time, Sony Pictures was like a big deal, Sony Music, all that type of stuff. It was a big deal. She brings in Sony, leveraging her relationship. I'm sure she gave it away in terms of the rent. Once Sony got here, remember, Versace was doing his thing at the time on Ocean Drive. Versace got here. He was the gentleman who ultimately ended up getting murdered in 1997 by that guy Andrew Cunanan. Yeah. So 97, I would say, was probably the peak of South Beach. Believe it or not, from the international rock star effect. But Mara Rebel, who now remember, she had a place in Wynwood, and now she's in Alapata, or where the Rebel family, they kind of have their thing going on. So Lincoln Road was nothing. It was cheap food, cheap tchotchke types of that. When I say tchotchke, think of like these old ass stores that the grandparents have had for 40 years. You walk in there, there's nothing you want to buy. The only thing you want to do is ask directions or maybe use the restroom. That's what it was filled with. There was virtually nothing around there. They actually took one of the spaces and they turned into like an art center, like a co-op, where all these local artists could come and basically display their stuff. And it was virtually free. It was right there, catty corner from where Starbucks went in, and then across from Apple Store. So, that's what it was back then. You had buskers, you had, if you wanted to learn to rollerblade, that would be the place to do it because there was nobody there.
Right. I think I might have learned how to rollerblade on Lincoln Road. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. And then Merritt comes, the Rebels make their investment. She gets actively involved. They do a whole variety of things. It starts to really blow up. You got the movies being made.